Welcome back to this Python tutorial series on constructing a recursive descent parsing algorithm for a calculator language. In today's video, we're going to be implementing the T1 and the T2 non-terminals. So let's define these functions here below. We're going to define T1. We're going to pass in our iterator and our previous value. So if you remember, we implemented term, and so in this example derivation, we go to the left-hand side of start. We get this number from term. We need to pass it on to T1. So we're going to pass it on through the parameter previous. The next thing we need to do is we need to check the next operand. We need to check for T1, is it an operand of the first level of precedence, which is subtraction and addition. So we're going to peek ahead. This is going to be operand 1. We'll say if token dot token, is it an operand? If it's not, then it's an epsilon transition. We're just going to return previous. If it is, we're going to consume this value, and we're going to store the operand. And the next thing we need to do is that T1 is also a term, and a term is a number. So we need to check if the next token is a number or not. So we're going to peek ahead. We'll say if token.token is a number, and if it's not, then here we're going to print out error expecting number, and we're going to return none. If it is a number, then what we're going to do is we're going to get the next value from term. And the reason why we do this is because, let's say here in T1, we have 3, which is our previous value being passed in. Our operand is the negative sign being assigned here. We peek ahead at the next token, which is 5. It is a number, and then now we need to get the value returned from term. This way, we actually have a level of precedence. So before we even perform subtraction or addition, we need to get the the next token value. So we're going to get the next value, and then here, this is where we'd actually we would return this value. So we're going to pass on our previous value, which is 3. We're going to pass on our operand, which would be negative, and we pass on our next value, which is the value returned from this term. So then we're going to return this calculation. Before that, we need to check if next is none, just in case if an error occurred. And if it is, we're going to return none. Oh, excuse me, we're actually not returning this value. We're going to store it. We're not returning it because T1 is right recursive. So we're going to recursively return T1 of that said value. This way, if we have an example of not just 3 minus 5, but let's say 3 minus 5 minus 5 plus 4. So we're going to recursively call. This would be the first T1 call. This would be the second T1 call. This would be the third T1 call. So we're going to perform this, and it's going to return, it's going to return. So this right here is a working T1 implementation. The next function is going to be T2, which is going to be almost the exact same. So I'm going to copy and paste, except the only difference is we're looking for operand 2. And instead of calling term, it should be a number. So we're going to peek ahead. Is it a number? It is a number. And what we're going to do is we're going to consume this token. And then we're going to pass it on to operand 2. So a couple more things before we actually finish this up. we need to delete next inside this operand 2 statement, and we need to pass in token. So we're not passing in the next value returned from term, we're actually passing in this number value. So instead of passing in the term value, we pass in the number value. And this number value is stored inside token. And one thing I forgot to do is go back down here to term. We are not passing in a previous value at all. So that should get rid of any errors. And now let's run this. In our previous example, 3 minus 3 times 3 returns 0. But in this case, it should return -6. Okay, here we go. We have an error. T2 is not defined. That is true. Let's change that to T2. Run it again. 3 minus 3 times 3. Where this should evaluate first to 9. So we have a semantic error. And I found a semantic error because we accidentally labeled this as T2 when this one should have been T2. So now, let's rerun this. 3 minus 3 times 3. We have another semantic error. So after debugging for a little bit, I found out why our program was getting a semantic error. It is because we forgot to change the operand symbol here. It's still OP. So now, whenever we pass it through, an operand 1 fails. So we need to change this to the appropriate operand value. So addition and subtraction is now operand 1, and division and multiplication is now operand 2. Cut and paste, make this a little bit more organized. Plus minus, there we go. Now it should run. So we can even do, let's say 45 divided by 5 minus 5. We can even do, let's say, 3 minus 5 times 7. Oops. 3 minus 5 times 7, which should be 3 minus 35, which is 32. So here we have it, a working calculator for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So now in the next video, I'm going to introduce parentheses and negation. So stay tuned.